Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
As our elite struggles to like wrap their minds around like the basic elements of like genuinely traditionally religious Western culture, while giving a complete pass to like, you know, what DOD is doing, what Five Eyes is doing, what the rest of the administrative state is doing, what the Biden administration is doing, with regard to, you know, the completely boundless culture war taking place at home. I mean, this is just like shocking and disqualifying stuff. And, you know, it's not to say these people don't have like minimum competencies at doing their jobs in their particular lane, which some of them do, some of them don't. But, you know, as events are unfolding, the standards are changing and the measure of competence is changing. And yes, you know, it's legitimate to look at this chatter and to say like, these people are rushing us into a full-on clash of civilizations at digital speed with digital scope. And why are they doing it? Because they don't even understand just like how to be human beings anymore. That's what's really frightening.
Hello and welcome to the Roundtable I'm Every Woman edition. This is your weekly publishers and editors podcast at The American Mind. I'm your friendly neighborhood host, features editor Spencer Clavin. I am joined by a righteous crew today, by editor James Poulos, by managing editor Seth Barron, and by publisher and president Ryan Williams. Much to discuss, as it seems always these days, but we're going to start with our friend Ketanji Brown Jackson, Biden's pick for Supreme Court, currently in front of the Senate for hearings. So we've all been, I'm sure, poring over the many hours of footage that have emerged from these, I think, 3 days so far of questioning. There's a lot to unpack here. We probably won't get into all of it. You know, Supreme Court hearings, always a bit of political theater, always some pretty sickening grandstanding, but of course nothing like the circus and fiasco that we have when a Republican is up for confirmation. There will be no Kavanaugh barn burners or accusations of gang rape based on shoddy to no evidence, because of course Republicans don't play hardball that way. Instead, we've had a few questions about some lenient sentencing in a child pornography case, which is sort of uncomfortable and seems like an awkward issue for Jackson, but probably unlikely to really stick to her name. She gave 3 months to this really despicable trafficker in child pornography. She says it's because it was because the digital technology had enabled pornographers to amass more images, and so she thought she should be nicer than the law dictated from back when you could only send images over mail or some such thing. I sort of list this off as to acknowledge it. It's despicable, but not particularly likely to really have legs beyond the hearings. Likewise, you know, attempts to link Jackson to the CRT that is peddled at a school on which she is on the board, probably too tangential to really work. Quizzes, interesting and amusing quizzes on the anti-racist baby children's book by Ted Cruz, revealing what we probably would have already known, that of course the left is indeed captured by and all in behind critical race theory and the various odious forms of ideology that it entails. I say this with a slight yawn because I'm skeptical that many Republicans will indeed vote not to confirm her in the end. It all seems a bit limp and toothless. But there was a shocking moment, even for a jaded fart like myself, when Marsha Blackburn from my newly adopted home state of Tennessee just asked the famous Matt Walsh question, "What is a woman?" And Ketanji Brown Jackson's answer was, "Well, I'm not a biologist, so I can't say." And I'm also not a biologist, so I suppose I'm not qualified to comment, but this seems like a pretty significant and actually successful gotcha. Not in the sense that it's unfair, but just in the sense that they really did, pin her down on being unable to come out and say, men are men, women are women, XY chromosomes are men, and XX chromosomes are women, so on and so forth. I mean, the kind of deep-seated attachment now to post-humanist, transhumanist fantasia, which Jackson knows she has to acknowledge. She has to kind of make that part of her ideological worldview in order to succeed at any level as a Democrat. And she knows she'll probably be called upon to defend the idea that men can be women. The grandest irony, of course, is that the whole point of appointing her is to appoint, as Biden said, a black woman to the Supreme Court. So I guess since Biden's not a biologist and none of us are biologists, we can't really be sure whether he has achieved that goal.
Spencer, I mean, he
Yes.
consulted a biologist about, I'm sure they examined
Oh, did they?
Miss Jackson. Come on. I mean, just don't be that glib. No, the whole thing is pretty extraordinary. I forget. Do you guys know the answer to this question? They don't swear you in when you testify at the Judiciary Committee, do they? Because I don't know. It's probably too much to say she's perjuring herself, but I mean, everyone knows she's kind of fibbing because of ideological reasons. I mean, any intelligent individual in this day and age knows how to answer that question. But we've come quite a long ways to the point at which leaders of one of our national parties, and actually, well, I'll lay off Republicans' establishment for a minute. Leaders of one of our national parties can't really answer that question. Or really, I mean, they could, but for political reasons, they can't. So the answer, the chromosome answer and the biology answer would be factually correct, but not politically correct. And so, we continue our slow, thankfully so far, slide into, our cultural revolution.
As the poet once said, "I'm sorry, Miss Jackson, you are a she." I mean, this goes beyond the bounds of the political and the ideological. This kind of thing can only be understood as a theological phenomenon. I mean, not being able to say what a woman is. But it's odd because, the biologists are themselves now torn on the issue of what exactly this mysterious thing called a woman is, or many other things besides. I mean, what is a person? Monkeys, maybe dolphins. This is all of a piece, and it goes far beyond the bounds of any one confirmation hearing. And it is evidence that when you have cadres of lawyers saying, no, we can't give you the same straight answer, so to speak, that has been given by educated people and not so educated people for thousands upon thousands of years, perhaps as many as 12,000 if recent archaeological digs unearthing new urban developments suggest. Lawyers can't do it. Biologists can't do it. Politicians, figures from every walk of life are now equal in the presence of a caste that refuses to say. And what would they say if they were being honest? They would say, well, it's whatever my religion says that it is. A woman's whatever my religion says, because they can't even take refuge behind the swarm. Although I think they would do that as sort of a fallback position. In the same way that people are, what does it mean to support the current thing? It means that really it's the swarm that tells you what to do. And it's not, your agency as someone who decides what should and should not be supported has been assimilated into this kind of deterritorialized system of intelligence that tells you, where the swarm is going next. And you just do that thing. And that is your ethics. But that can't be the entirety of your ethics unless you disappear completely into this deterritorialized intelligence. And that's why there are people who, regardless of what field or industry they're in, what they really want to be are priests in the new religion. And religion is the Western way of war. So this is a conflict that is not going to go away. And it would be nice to resolve it without coming to blows. And historically, we have some lessons to learn about what the cost of peace entails. It entails, for instance, not going to war with Russia over questions like these. And the Russians have been pretty clear as, this separate ordeal is unfolding in Ukraine, that they take very seriously the idea that, that those answers of the past 12,000 years to things like what is a man and what is a woman are the right answers. And increasingly they see the West, and not just the Russians, see the West as captive to this new religion, a religion that is hostile to the inherited definitions, primal definitions of our humanity and its constituent parts. And that is an invitation to a very serious conflict. And part of one of the biggest challenges for statesmen in the U.S. and elsewhere is going to be ameliorating that conflict and making sure that. I think it was Donald Trump himself who said, "I'm just trying to stop the world from killing itself." That's good. That's a good idea. Good statecraft right there.
Yeah, I agree with James. Like when I first heard of this, I thought, well, this is like just a religious response that you're unable. And the funny thing is, it's such an easy question to answer. What is a woman? The answer is obvious. It's who Joe Biden promised to appoint to the vice presidency and to the Supreme Court. Like, why is there even a question? Yeah, this weird circularity. And what's funny is looking at Twitter, all the people defending her response. Like, why are you asking me that? I'm not a biologist, and my job is to settle disputes. And all these people on Twitter are like, yeah, why? What a dumb question that is. Like, how would that even be relevant to the Supreme Court? The Constitution doesn't use the word woman. So why is this coming up? The massive cope on the part of the science deniers who want to pretend that a woman is someone who feels womanly. It's funny because, I was looking at Twitter earlier this week or last week about Leah Thomas, the greatest female swimmer in college sports today. And I was looking at the Human Rights Campaign Twitter feed. Now that's the biggest LGBT advocacy organization. And they had a lot on there about Rachel Levine, congratulating Rachel Levine for being the first four-star admiral, for being Woman of the Year. They didn't say a word about Leah Thomas anywhere, because I think the worm is turning on this issue. It's not obvious to anyone looking at it, but I think that they know that this is a losing cause. This idea that like a 6'4" man should be allowed to declare himself a woman, win all the swimming competitions, and like get naked in front of all these like co-eds because he says he's a woman. This just doesn't work. It just violates reality so heavily that we're not at that point yet where everybody's willing to go along with it. I think, maybe, I hope.
Yeah, this is where I will volunteer to get down on Republicans, because it's a winning issue if we can just have some balls, so to speak. The number of people and outlets who have used female pronouns to refer to Thomas, an issue on which, by the way, I am on record as being like a noted squish about this. I totally, like, up until our recent revolution, I totally understood, like, well, some people feel very uncomfortable, and perhaps, I understood the argument that to alleviate their discomfort, like, we could all kind of agree to play pretend. But when, in fact, it revealed itself to be not just a kind of concession made to a few struggling individuals, but rather a totalizing claim about ontological facts, right? Spiritual facts at the bedrock of reality, reaching into your very mind and demanding that you twist your own perception of things so that you can not only, make some sort of small linguistic carve out, but make a total about face in the understanding of humanity that everybody has always had ever, so far as we can imagine. Like every language that you could possibly speak has, male and female delineated as categories. They're used to refer to the same thing. This is a bedrock foundation of our humanity. And by the way, a source of tremendous joy and consolation that we are that we are a binary sexed species. All of this now to be completely erased, right? And the idea that you can kind of stand up against this without saying this is a man, right? I mean, it's not just about like, well, we are worried, that this is unfair for this one portion of the population, for this particular swim team. But like, this is a totalizing ideology that is not about like making some small advances for a small set of people with mental illness or some kind of like psychological problem. It is actually about like revising your entire vision of the world, as James is describing. And, Republicans do the same thing on this that they do on abortion. They talk about all these peripheral issues like, this clinic where this abortion is happening is not hygienic or safe, right? And it's only recently that we've gotten our elected representatives to admit that even if it were in pristine condition, it would be morally unconscionable to kill a baby, right? And similarly on this, right, we talk around these issues as if, we can get by if we just keep people from going into the Olympics and getting gold medals, or that's not what this is about. This is not like some small thing. It's about actually having the guts to say like, this is a man. And the only people so far who have done that in a big, high-profile way are the Babylon Bee, who, to their enormous credit, have been kicked off, refused to be allowed back on Twitter because they gave Rachel Levine, the guy that's, on Biden, the four-star admiral that you were talking about, they gave him the Man of the Year award, and now they're being, hounded out of existence. But that shows you exactly what the fight is about. And Republicans at every elected level have to catch wise to that.
And it's really funny because if you if like The Onion gave Marsha Blackburn, who asked, Judge Jackson about the definition of a woman, if they gave Marsha Blackburn the Man of the Year award, or if they gave a man the Woman of the Year, something like that, like nobody would consider that hateful or anything. So it's weird that like it's only hateful to misgender someone who is misgendering themselves.
This all just reveals that like there is no logical principle at the bottom of this here other than total interoperability among everyone and everything on terms that are simply decided by a religious caste of priests. There's no like ultimate principle. There's no grand moral schema. This is not Rawlsianism. This is not even Rorty talking about contingency and solidarity and irony. This is something else. And it's just fundamentally incompatible with our form of government and our way of life and our humanity. It just is. And the sooner that people acknowledge this, the sooner they will find a voice to stand up and say what needs to be said. Because, even under the like overbroad and malicious terms that this debate, such as it is supposed to be had, this goes far beyond questions of the political balance of race, sex, and gender. I mean, we've gone totally far afield from all of these things. And, on a good day, I feel like the seams are really starting to show. You have people being handpicked for positions of power and authority who are incapable of articulating even their own basis for exercising that power and authority. And that is indicative, even more than of a simple like lack of talent or a misbegotten sort of set of partisan objectives. This is really primal stuff, and it should be engaged on that level.
Yeah, you're totally right. I saw some kind of chart that was being distributed to maybe junior high school students about, it was supposed to explicate how gender sex, sexual identity, sexual attraction, how all of these, these 8 different categories and how they relate. And someone was like, how is this supposed to clarify things? And I said, no. The confusion is the point. The whole point is just to confuse children. They want children to be totally confused so they can remake them and turn them into these, transhumanist or transhuman, objects, cyborg objects that James talks about. It's terrible to think that we have a culture that is now becoming a culture of obfuscation, where that's really the point.
James,
I might also just go on to add here. Well, I'm starting to get worked up, so just tell me to shut up if I'm ranting. Too late, right? So Bob Gates is being interviewed on some Zoom channel. I don't know. I'm seeing this just kind of out of the corner of my eye as we're recording here, and he's talking about Vladimir Putin, and he's like, oh yeah, Putin obviously been spending more time in isolation due to COVID. He's not the man that he used to be. I'm not really sure what's going on in his head. I mean, I hear he's spending time with an Orthodox priest, and he's sort of getting into mysticism. Basically, creating the impression that Putin is receding into some kind of Rasputin-like parallel universe where all is mysterious and obfuscated and can't be reasoned with, and logic. And to hear these kinds of claims as our elite struggles to wrap their minds around the basic elements of genuinely traditionally religious Western culture, while giving a complete pass to what DOD is doing, what Five Eyes is doing, what the rest of the administrative state is doing, what the Biden administration is doing with regard to the completely boundless culture war taking place at home. I mean, this is just shocking and disqualifying stuff. And it's not to say these people don't have minimum competencies at doing their jobs in their particular lane, which some of them do, some of them don't. But as events are unfolding, the standards are changing, and the measure of competence is changing. And yes, it's legitimate to look at this chatter and to say these people are rushing us into a full-on clash of civilizations at digital speed with digital scope. And why are they doing it? Because they don't even understand just how to be human beings anymore. That's what's really frightening.
James, you don't think at base the one principle is just the latest evolution of the conquest and war on nature in service of the emancipation of human will and desire? I mean, I realize they adjudicate the boundaries, the priestly class adjudicates the boundaries of those desires and which are good and which are bad, but is that not a guiding principle?
Well, I mean, I think, if you go back to Hobbes and you're okay, here's this materialistic guy and he's interested in infusing spiritual and temporal authority in the hands of one monarch that is so supreme in authority that the many are overawed and the nobles sort of recognize and accept that they should set aside their claims to independence for the greater good, and that the real majesty is the majesty of the king. And, Hobbes has the charts and sort of shows how you start with, just like Sarah Silverman, you start with molecules and then you work your way up to people, and that's it. That's the planet Earth. And Hobbes could write in Latin and did write and publish in Latin and considered himself to be and is understood to be a rationalist in so many words. And you have Michael Oakeshott who comes along and goes, oh no, it's more complicated, and actually Hobbes was the first liberal, and no. And some of those arguments are colorable, but I think it is fair to say that the trajectory of modern political thought that sought to ground the regime in instrumental reason was based on a conviction that instrumental reason would not drive you insane. Mm-hmm. That at the bottom of instrumental reason was observable science and the logic of mathematics, and that these things were real and were unchanging. And the deeper you went into the contemplation of mathematics, as Bertrand Russell and others said, the closer that you would get to the kind of austere beauty of the perfection of the universe. And what we are seeing now is evidence that this was a mistake, that in fact, at the bottom of math is not some sort of perfect language that fully captures and describes the whole, but rather a sort of chaos that is beyond human comprehension. You look at like quantum physics, you look at stuff like that, and you look at the people who contemplated math the most, and they weren't like Socrates, they weren't like Plato. They became sort of crazy people and started just building weapons and using them. And so at some point, there was a turn where the instrumental rationalists led themselves, I think, into a belief system where there's no ultimate judge in a cosmic sense as to what use of reason is an extension of our human nature and what use of reason is a destruction of our human nature. And so we wind up in a position where it's like, well, really it's human consciousness that is the only thing in the universe that has enduring meaning because it can be infinite, and we kind of created these machines that can also replicate information infinitely. And so really the last thing that there is for us to do is kind of put two and two together and put the human consciousness in the machines and liberate the consciousness from everything that sucks about being human. And it's like, well, okay, assuming that you can define what consciousness is, assuming that you can suck it out of our brains or wherever you think it is, and assuming that you can inject it into these machines, then, but why? But why should we even do that? And there's this, a really, I think, barbaric mysticism at the root of what instrumental reason has become. And it's showing up in all of these insane contradictions where it's like, well, obviously women are better than men. Anything that boys can do, girls can do better. I think Amy Barrett said that in her testimony, that she would tell her kids that anything that boys can do, girls can do better. And it's like, well, okay. But then anything that girls can do, well, really machines can do better. We need artificial wombs, we need fleshlights. We sure can't stop that from happening. And we should actually encourage people because there are too many people. We got to reduce the birth rate, and there should be no unwanted children. And, maybe children are a problem in other ways. And it all ends up contradicting itself on some level. And the contradiction is the point. The confusion is the point. It creates this sort of sea of possibility, not for its own sake, but so that, certain people can be elevated and make these decisions and summon this swarm of possibilities in certain ways and channel it toward some things and not others. And the ordinary person is not supposed to question these and is not supposed to have any basis where they could question them in an authoritative way, and this coming from people who insist that they are the defenders of our sacred global democracy.
Good answer.
Yeah, that's well said. The only coda, I guess, I'd add to that incredibly articulate sort of transhistorical summary of how this whole thing emerged is simply to say that as a political tool, right, redefining your enemies out of existence does intersect nicely with the kind of its atoms all the way down, which, by the way, is perennially a philosophy that emerges in times of political crack-up and chaos. I mean, what's the other big moment of atomization, the multiverse and materialism and atomization? Well, it's Epicurus, and what's that? That's the Hellenistic era. That's the collapse of Greek sort of stability and the fracturing of the world into multiple centers of gravity. And far be it from me to suggest that, as Adams did, that all our philosophers are base Epicureans, but it does seem as if since Hume, basically, the confusion has been exactly the point. It's Hume who lifts out of who peers into science and mathematics and lifts out of it precisely the uncertainty that we are now paralyzed in, unable to say that 1 + 1 = 2 because we're not experts and we haven't been deigned authoritative by the kind of priestly caste. And when that collides with the longstanding progressive tactic of just being able to say that you represent a certain demographic because anybody who disagrees with you is not really officially of that demographic ipso facto, right? You're not really Hispanic. You're not really black. If you don't vote for me, you ain't black. All of these innumerable quotations, it's very convenient to sort of marry that to the impossibility of defining a woman, right? If you're not, what's the ultimate conclusion that, anybody who wants to be is a woman? It's anybody, as Seth said, anybody that Joe Biden says is a woman. But let's talk about a real woman. And wow, what a woman. Madeleine Albright, that's an awkward transition. Madeleine Albright has died. And we certainly do not celebrate anybody's death here on this podcast. This is the first woman to serve as Secretary of State. And under Clinton, she died at 84. It seems to have been of cancer. And we don't mean to kind of gloat over this death, but it is also a normal tradition at the death of a major public figure to reflect on his or her legacy. And Albright's is one that's, I think, worth recalling and remembering. The quote that was most famous, or most infamous rather, from appearance on 60 Minutes seems particularly germane now. This was in 96 when Leslie Stahl was asking about sanctions against Iraq. She said, "We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children that died in Hiroshima. And, is the price worth it?" Madeleine Albright, I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it. Not to boil her whole legacy down to that, but simply to hold Albright up to the crowd as an example of the kind of dual party perma-state that we've been living with basically as long as I've been alive, and to contemplate whether this stunning and brave woman is worthy of our remembrance.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, she kind of shepherded the U.S. into the end of its the beginning and the end of its hyperpower stage, which really, I mean, how long did that last? Like from the collapse of the Soviet Union, like around 91, around the time Clinton came in. And then when did hyperpower, I guess during Obama, when did we kind of slip from being the hyper, or maybe just now we're just no longer the hyperpower. We're back into multipolarity. But, yes, Iraq sanctions, that was a disaster. I mean, it's funny that Leslie Stahl said 500,000 children, that's more than died in Hiroshima. Well, it's 10 times the number of people who died in Hiroshima. It's just weird, the historical illiteracy some of these people have. And then I guess with Madeleine Albright, I mean, I guess she was also the architect of the war in Serbia, which it's kind of a little bit forgotten. But I mean, the bombardment of Serbia really set the Russians off. I mean, because they're historical allies. And Putin has always referred to that. Well, if NATO feels like it can go and carve off part of Serbia, why can't we go and carve off part of Ukraine? This type of thing. I think it's underemphasized how crucial that invasion really was to the thinking of Russia. And also, as I recall, did not NATO bomb a Chinese building during the bombing of Belgrade? And it seemed very intentional. That's a little vague for me now, but I don't know. I mean, Russia and China were both very much annoyed by that campaign. And I think that was partially the point.
I think that's right. People forget, but this was really NATO's first concerted military action as NATO was that war against Serbia. And Chinese facility was bombed and people did die. China was very upset. And, we bombed Christians on Easter, on Orthodox Easter, and didn't bat an eye. And, that was a marker that said, well, there are more important things than that. There's a different ethical measure. And if Christians have to die on Easter, then they shouldn't have allowed a strong man to take charge and do what Slobo did. And that, I think that was an important moment in the history. And I think that, this is another case of these people who have been at the controls for, throughout Madeleine Albright's career are people who simply do not understand and are unwilling to take seriously the foundational civilization of their main rivals in the world. And, I think all Americans are still, on more or less the same page when it comes to, would you rather be China or Chinese, or would you rather be Russia or Russian? I still think the vast majority of Americans across the political spectrum would say, no, I will take being American instead, please. Thank you. But this willful ignorance causes trouble. And when you are the world's sole superpower, maybe you can get away with it for a while, although, there are painful consequences for that we're still reckoning with to this day. But when you are not, when you create digital technology and create it through your military intelligence complex and expect that to cement your global rule, and in fact, it kind of does the opposite of that, then you find yourself in a different situation where that kind of willful ignorance becomes not just embarrassing or self-undermining, but dangerous to the international peace and security you say that you support, and ultimately, dangerous to the interests of the Americans that you rule.
Yeah, that Hiroshima point, Seth, speaks, I think, really deeply, not just to Stahl's kind of illiteracy, historical illiteracy, but also to the way in which our foreign policy leaders encourage us to think about global policy and international conflict in terms of demonology. I mean, we've been thinking throughout this episode about the sort of religious and sacral aspect of so much of our politics in the absence of a, really robust, I think, religion among the people, a really robust Christianity of the kind that sort of built this country even before it was officially founded. And this is one way in which that really seems to me to be true. It's true not just in the great sin of Hiroshima, which nobody can tell you anything about except that it was really, really bad that we did that nasty thing. But also in terms of when you look at the first half of the 20th century and the inability of really anybody on the street or in schools and good universities to tell you about anything other than Hitler and the Holocaust. And the only thing they can tell you about him is that he was a lot like today's Republicans, and he was very sinful and bad and evil. And then of course the millions, tens of millions, nearly 100 million people who died under Soviet oppression, completely erased, completely ignorant. Even conservatives, right, who grow up sort of suspicious of communism, are never taught about like the famines and the Gulag and all of this. It's I'm currently experiencing right now as I'm running a series on the Gulag Archipelago, the shocking state of ignorance, because this stuff is purposefully erased to create these demon and hero narratives. You're seeing in Ukraine right now, right? A situation in which, as I've said, like I'm sort of on Ukraine, rooting for Ukraine, and yet it's turning into this cataclysmic kind of end of days story so that people can really get behind, this neo-globalist order, which lives according to the one true faith, the faith of post-gender, post-human, anti-racist, sort of like, kumbaya. And what's ironic is that these are the exact same people who chastise us when we do say, I like America and I want American politicians to take care of America. I want American priorities to be first and foremost in the minds of our leaders. They chastise us for jingoism and for a certain form of, American exceptionalism. Well, you just like this place because it's your place, but America is very racist and bad and wrong. And these are the same people who practice this staggering degree of liberal exceptionalism, right? Who will sail into countries blindly and with almost no plan, flailing about, causing destruction untold, and then tell you, well, it's in the name of freedom and democracy. It's in the name of bringing transgender rights, and really, like, what we ought to be doing is probably also just scolding Ukraine a little bit about their failures in transgender policy. And, when you are a believer of that degree, you don't even see that the harm you cause and the disasters that you set in in motion are just as bad as the disasters that you condemn others for, if not worse. And it is amazing the amount of kind of religious passion and jingoism. It's jingoism on behalf not of America, but of the sort of globalist permastate.
Yeah, and you know what? During the Kosovo War, the Serbian War, there was the same type of reflexive, liberal, like delight. Like I remember Thomas Friedman wrote this piece, like, because Milosevic would go on about 1340, whatever year it was that they had a big battle about Kosovo. And Thomas Friedman wrote this piece like, oh, you want 1348? We can bomb you back to then. You want 1620? We can bomb you back to then. There was so much delight about like 30 or 60 days of continuous bombing of Belgrade. And also the same kind of reflexive, but not informed at all, like adoration of the Kosovars, who were fine. Look, I have nothing against Kosovar Albanians. Maybe they had a good point. Maybe they didn't. Why it was so important that there be two Albanian nations in Europe, that NATO had to really embrace this. But it was very similar in the way in which, ostensible liberals were so excited about local nationalism for other people and bombing Slavs. It was weird, and nobody really seemed to be that worked up about it. But the parallels between that and this Ukraine thing, I think, are very interesting.
Very interesting. And, over time, it has been a condition of being accepted into the Borg of the West, that countries participate in the culture war, that they in the same way that you have to, you got to accept this body of rules to join the EU. You have to join the Cultural Revolution in order to be a member of the Borg West in good standing. Just in the news 6 days ago, Kosovo's parliament rejects new law recognizing same-sex civil unions. Why is this happening in Kosovo? And well, it's because it's a global movement. I mean, you got Radio Free Europe, December 2021, the worrying regression of LGBT rights in Eastern Europe. It is a package deal. And I think this is quite transparent. And I think that this is a factor in what's going on in Ukraine. How could it not be? They've taken this game plan and they're running with it. They really think that their best chance of consolidating what U.S.-led Western dominance of a globalized world is through this kind of rainbow coalition, and a rainbow coalition that would even be somewhat unrecognizable to the likes of Jesse Jackson, where you have to keep tacking people on to the coalition. You have to keep adding stripes, and this is a digital flag we're talking about here. So there's really the map is bigger than the territory. You can cram as many stripes in there as you can imagine, and they're getting more and more extreme and bizarre. And this is kind of the algorithm. And the front lines for where that algorithm is going to make progress, we know where those front lines are. It's swept through the Protestant West. It's swept through a lot of the Catholic West. There aren't that many Orthodox in the West, so their mileage has varied. But in Europe, the Orthodox are in some significant ways the folks who are the most resistant to joining that Borg, and I don't think you can rule that. You can simply exclude that, as so many people do, from a sound analysis of the geopolitics of Ukraine.
Yeah, we have to take to get back to the starting point for this discussion, or at the beginning of this segment anyway. You have to take Madeleine Albright as of a piece with foreign policy establishment. As our good friend, dearly departed Angelo Codevilla liked to argue, of really the last century, at least, really since the turn of the 20th century, Angelo would argue, American foreign policy has been progressive in a bipartisan way. And so we should not be surprised that the latest evolution of progressivism in this sort of post-60s kernels in the 60s, and now sort of fully grown, corn stalks. I said kernels, so we'll stick with the fully grown corn stalk. Anyway, this is all these seeds have borne fruit. I'll stop with the analogies or the metaphors. But we're now dealing with just the leading edge of progressivism, and the really it's a bipartisan consensus with a little blip of objection during the Trump years, and maybe another little blip during the George W. Bush years when they briefly tried to talk about abstinence to cure AIDS. But with a couple of little side steps or backward steps, we're really running headlong into full cultural revolution exportation. And our colleague Chris Caldwell, his last essay, well, not last, 2 essays ago. Spencer, was it the last one, the Poland? It's not the newest issue, is it?
Poland is the latest, I think.
Yeah, sorry. Spencer's my authority on CRB. Anyway.
I'd probably be wrong.
It's kind of a successor to Chris's last essay, which was on Hungary, and they're kind of twins in a way. But his argument is that and this was before Ukraine or anything had flared up, but his argument is it's the EU and globalist progressivism, including of U.S. flavor, against Poland. And I mean, the sort of the whole point of transatlantic foreign policy now is to export our domestic identity politics pathologies and insist they must be complied with, or you don't get aid and you're not respectable. And it's our friend John Fonte. I don't know if he's written about this. He certainly has talked about it with me and others. He says you can look at the old late Cold War places that tracked freedom across the globe, and a lot of them, almost all of them, have now been kind of assimilated into what you might call a McCain, Obama, now Blinken, take your pick of bipartisan folks, push to judge freedom and rights on the basis of liberalism or progressive liberalism. So a lot of these institutions that saw themselves as vanguards against the expansion of Soviet tyranny have pretty much been assimilated, and now they're pushing, the whole LGBTQ agenda as the prerequisite for decency. It was all kind of seamless. So that's just the latest iteration of what Codevilla was talking about. We lived in the progressive 20th century, and it certainly infected foreign policy, and now with Trump out, that whole story can continue. And even in the Trump administration, I mean, the Secretary of State Rex Tillerson certainly wasn't opposed in any ideological or small c constitutional way to this sort of progress. It's all a self-perpetuating machine that continues to march forward. Unwinding it is imperative, I think, for those of us who are defenders of Western civilization, and it's certainly wrapped up. It's, we don't need to be, and we certainly aren't, Putin cheerleaders, but this question, to say that it has nothing to do with Russia and Ukraine, as you guys had said, is nuts. And so it's going to be a hard thing to unwind, but we could take some encouragement that across the globe, some sanity is returning, if only by necessity. And so we should encourage the return of sanity.
Well, yeah, I mean, if your politics is at the level of the theological, it's likely to also become evangelical. It's hypothetically, I guess, it's possible to have a religion that you hold privately and never talk to anybody about. But if you're a major world power and you adopt yeah, exactly, that's right. I mean, look, like plenty of people, Jews are mostly not that evangelical. But if you're a major world power and you adopt a state religion, then your influence in the world is going to be to indoctrinate people into that religion. We saw it when we pulled out of Afghanistan. The first thing the Taliban did was paint over murals of George Floyd. Anyway, we're running out of time, and we did want to make sure we touched on one other thing, which is the conspiracy theory mongering New York Times, famous for its right-wing conspiracy theories, has bought into the false media narrative that there is some sort of laptop that I guess Hunter Biden maybe left somewhere, and it maybe ties him to this Ukrainian energy company called Burisma. I'm referring here to a New York Times article entitled "Hunter Biden Paid Tax Bill, but Broad Federal Investigation Continues." It's on the federal investigation of Hunter Biden. And it was published, just so we can get the time lapse exactly right, published on March 16th, 2022. Now, if you scroll, I believe, 24 paragraphs down into this piece, you will find just a casual note dropped. Let's find it here just so that we can be exact. The people familiar with the investigation said prosecutors had examined emails between Mr. Biden, Mr. Archer, and others about Burisma and other foreign business activity. Those emails were obtained by the New York Times from a cache of files that appears to have come from a laptop abandoned by Mr. Biden in a Delaware repair shop. The email and others in the cache were authenticated by people familiar with them and with the investigation. If you are an ancient of days and you've been around and you're acquainted with ancient history, you may recall some, 23 months ago when this story was broken by the New York Post, and they were promptly not only kicked off of Twitter, but you couldn't even share this story in DMs. You couldn't link to it when you were just sort of texting a friend via Twitter. It was dampened on Facebook. The whole thing was not only covered up, but simply forbidden to speak of. And now, without any shred or hint of introspection, and in fact, in many cases with positive self-defense, the media class are simply confessing that this was true all along.
Yeah, I think it was. Did you say it was like closer to the election, wasn't it? Wasn't it like in October of?
Yeah, it was right before. It was a pivotal moment, sort of an October surprise. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because yes, they've acknowledged that it exists, but nobody's interested in the information that's in there. I mean, the fact that, Joe Biden was apparently, well, for one thing, he lied because he claimed he had never met any of these Burisma people. But, the laptop shows that he did. And it just seems like there's this complete vacancy of interest. It's almost boring to look into how the president's son was tasked by him to, deal with Ukraine and all these Chinese companies that were essentially just part of the Chinese military, and, get money from them and put 10% aside for the big guy. But the other thing I'm really interested in is the difference. Look at how the federal government dealt with this question and how they're dealing with Ashley Biden's diary, which I gather she left at somebody's house that she was crashing at. It's a very strange family. Like their father, they're all multimillionaires. Their father's the vice president and now the president. And Hunter Biden drops off a laptop at some place and never picks it up. Ashley Biden is out of rehab and then crashing at somebody's house and leaves her duffel bag there, and they find her diary. And then people are looking at the diary. And now the federal government is crashing into people's houses to find out if they have looked at the diary and why did they have it, and was Donald Trump Jr. present while people were looking at the diary. Now, this is a diary of a private individual. It doesn't seem like it was, even if a diary is stolen, what the hell does that have to do with the federal government? Why is she wasn't, her father was running for president at the time. It's weird how the federal government really seems to have become like a Praetorian Guard, like the FBI and stuff, like just defending the interests of the person and family of a Democrat president. Like that's what they do.
Yeah, take all of it together. It really is remarkable, Seth. I can't agree more. Plus, we left out also that, none of these people's reputations suffer. Even Hunter Biden, he's made hundreds of thousands of dollars now selling his paintings at silent auctions, which seems to those of us, I don't know. I suppose you could make the argument that these are collectibles because of Hunter Biden's shenanigans in recent years and just the epic meltdown, both personally in his marital life and then through drugs and everything else. I guess people would pay for some token of that in his art on a lark, and so would pay lots of money for that. I don't know. It looks to a lot of us like just another way to launder money to the Biden family. And, if you had told me 10 years ago, or 5 years ago that, you know, there's sort of this Biden crime family. That's what Rush Limbaugh used to call the Clinton crime family. You know, everyone knew that Biden was kind of a semi-corrupt shill for their credit card companies because of his position as a senator from Delaware. But I think I can't be surprised by the corruption of American political elites. And then some, you know, slow rolling train wreck of a story like this occurs. And I'm just surprised again. It's just amazing. And the press, yeah, as you say, and the other sign of the great corruption of our national political life is the media is totally uninterested. I mean, in previous eras, this would have been enough to hound someone out of the presidency, or almost. Or at least would have been grounds for, I don't know, some special investigation, maybe an impeachment. I mean, the whole thing just stinks. And it's the ultimate irony is that, you know, Ukraine is now at the middle of a global crisis. And the New York Times quietly admits that Hunter Biden's laptop was in fact not a Russian op, but was in fact real and is full of weird stuff that we haven't even scratched the surface of really, except on the fringes of the internet, because our mainstream media establishment wants to black it out because they have to act as the Praetorian Guard, as you said, Seth. It's the whole thing is extraordinary. But for a, you know, return of a golden era of journalism when, I mean, just imagine all the wonderful long form, deeply reported pieces you could do on all this stuff. It would probably be enough to bring down a presidency. Alas, it won't happen.
Well, I mean, it's all water under the bridge, right? And this actually, right-wing conspiracy theorists knew that this was going to happen when they blocked the post. It was like,
right.
You know, oh, well, they'll admit that this is true and it will all be too late because they'll already have won their victory. It's the same thing with the, you know, vaccine mandate for they knew would get struck down in the courts, or they thought it would, and it didn't matter because they'd already intimidated people. I mean, I shouldn't say it didn't matter because that was a big victory, but like they've already intimidated people into putting mandates into their own private businesses, and I mean they're so visibly corrupt, and they simply refuse to acknowledge it because if they acknowledged it, then there would be, there's nothing but the corruption. Not like, oh, we made this mistake, but sorry, we'll try better next time. It's like that is their MO, as Seth and Ryan, you're both saying. And so they just have to kind of lie openly and challenge you to recognize it and accuse you of being a slanderous, evil, racist murderer if you do. And they do it again and again until people wise up. And I do think that, like, there's a weirdly heartening dimension to this, much like with the trans stuff, that people are not actually, I don't think, so far gone that they can be simply told to ignore the evidence of their eyes. I mean, some people are, but when you do this over and over again, what it does is it makes conspiracy theorists out of people. I mean, I cannot count the number of podcasts I have listened to and articles I have read from the left about, you know, wow, this Joe Rogan guy, he's, you know, what's the appeal of Joe Rogan? Like, you know, why are so many people getting suckered into this? Or what's the appeal of, you know, online fitness groups? Like, why are so many people, like, why are they gathering these conspiratorial? And not one for a moment has done the, like, am I the bad guy meme, right? Like, did we do that? Did we by just openly lying over and over again and concealing important information from the public that would be germane to crucial decisions they were about to make, to like voting for the next 4 years of their lives, to voting themselves into inflation and war and death, right? Do we maybe like mess up by hiding things from people and then refusing to admit and screaming at them when they dared raise the issue? Like, none of that is on the table in these vast retrospectives about, oh, how did we get here? Like, how did we not see this coming? And they did exactly the same thing with Donald Trump. I mean, it's kind of all about Trump, right? It's like suddenly people said that they weren't going to take this constant abuse, and they were like, well, if you won't let us redress this in a sort of calm and nonpartisan way, if we can't say that men are men or women are women, if we can't say that, like, you know, the American economy should work for Americans, if we can't say that in a polite way, then we're just gonna like elect a freaking bulldozer, and that's what they did. It's what they'll continue to do, and that will just be more pretext for the left to continue to accuse normal, concerned parents and citizens thousands of people of being dangerous domestic extremists and conspiracy theorists. So, like, that escalation is ongoing, but I think they're going to find out relatively quickly that it's actually not a very popular tactic to outlaw just basic observation of fact.
Well, they did this the other day with Judge Jackson. I guess Josh Hawley was saying, why were you so soft on all of these like child porn sentences, and saying that like an 18-year-old looking, or I guess she had she sort of thought that they shouldn't be classified as sex offenders. I mean, I suppose there's a debate about that, but then this was immediately cast as a QAnon conspiracy theory. It's just funny how they they essentially now say that any criticism is just a conspiracy theory. At the same time, they're the masters of conspiracy theories, because the whole Russiagate thing turned out to be nothing, which they still haven't really dealt with. I don't know how they've managed to smooth that over in their minds. But
yeah, and Kavanaugh is still a credibly accused sexual predator, if not quasi gang rape organizer. Yeah, and they're all, that's been pretty rich today. After Lindsey Graham does the Lindsey Graham thing, and others too. Everyone grandstands at these Judiciary Committee hearings for Supreme Court justices. And all the Democrats, like Leahy and others, are all indignant and huffy about a pretty mild badgering of the witness, within sort of spitting distance of the Kavanaugh confirmation, just not too long ago. It's just I don't know. I wonder how much. I'm always curious about how many of the normal, even the high information public, really believes any of this or takes any of it seriously. I suppose a decent amount, because everyone keeps doing it. It must have some payoff, but the whole thing just it's a circus.
Oh yeah, I mean, to watch on Twitter, people will be like, "This is what Black women have to face every day. Qualified, strong, proud Black women are interrogated at their workplace, in the home, by white men that just call them into question just because they're." And it's like, it's as if the Kavanaugh hearings never happened, right? This is not the. I mean, in fact, as we said at the beginning, it's pretty tame what the Republicans are doing, especially given how serious the situations under discussion are. And I don't think they need to rectify it in their heads. I think they just, I think it's just, as James said earlier, the logic of it is power, the aim of it is power, and the motivation of it is power. And so if that's what you're going for, then like you do and say what you need to do to get power. In any case, we are out of time. We've gotten into a lot this week. I think this was a good one. I shouldn't toot our own horn like that, but I'll sign us off by saying thank you once again for listening to The Roundtable. If you'd like to know more about our work, visit our websites at Claremont.org, ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, AmericanMind.org, and our DC-based Center for Preserving the American Way of Life, dc.claremont.org. If you'd like to support our work, visit claremont.org/donate. And don't forget, all importantly, to rate, review, share, and subscribe. Tell your grandma, tell your wife, tell your friends, tell your kids. They all got to be listening to The Roundtable and the many other podcasts that we put out as well. It really helps when you give a 5-star review to spread the word and make the show successful. Thanks to our production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon, Annalisa Lee, and Noah Peterson. And thanks to you all, most of all, for listening. See you next week.
Taco Bell is now the last place in LA where you can get gas for under $2.